I've had a long-standing love affair with the 62MAS Recreations from Seiko. I've had several versions of them in my collection. Whenever a new one came out, I would debate back and forth with myself whether or not I should buy it, sell an old one, or just expand the collection. Now they released the SJE093 as the newest version of the 62MAS, and I again find myself considering whether it's a watch worth adding to the collection. The watch which all of these watches draw their inspiration from is the Seiko 62MAS. These were the Seiko skin divers. When Rolex was selling the 6538 and Tudor was selling the 7922, the progenitors of the Submariner and what we know today as the Black Bay 54, this was the Seiko offering. An affordable 38mm skin diver watch with 150mm of water resistance under acrylic glass. It was an all-black watch with a dive bezel with white numerals and markers, baton hands above the dial, stick plots at the hour markers, and a date complication at 3 o'clock. In 2017, Seiko decided to release a reinterpretation of this watch, which was the SLA017. Since then, numerous iterations have been released, which can be categorized along two dimensions. There are the watches that are the most faithful reinterpretations of the original 62MAS. These are the SLA017, the SLA043, and this new SJE093. Then there are the reimagined versions like the SPB143, the SLA065, and numerous others that more broadly draw inspiration from the 62MAS, but also try to incorporate that watch aesthetic with more modern sensibilities. The difference between these two ends of the first scale are that the reinterpretations have less premium case finishing, opting instead for a more true to the original matte toolish aesthetic. The reinterpretations have thinner dive bezels that slope away from the crystal and again are more true to the original. The others, well, they have different levels of beveling, chamfering and polishing, or more advanced techniques that are less toolish but overall tend in general to make the watches look a little bit more premium. The second dimension of difference is build quality, most notably with the movements, but not only. The SPB models feature the 6R movements, whereas the SLA models feature the 8L movements. The difference here is the beat rate and the overall quality of the movement. The 8X movements essentially are specced down versions of the Grand Seiko movements, where the 6Rs are more mid-range Seiko workhorse movements. The bezel action on the SLA models is far superior to the SPBs with a stiffer bezel rotating action that also aligns more consistently. Depending on the model, you'll also get a ceramic-esque finish to the steel bezel that again makes the SLA models more premium. When you go up close, you also see noticeable differences. Fonts on the SPB models at the date window are unevenly printed compared to the SLAs. On the SLAs, the applied markers are a bit sharper, the beveled edges are more precise, and any polish is just done significantly better. In some cases, even on SLA models, you even get Soratsu polishing, which is usually something you only see on Grand Seiko models. The newest model is the SJE093. You get a 38mm case with a height of 12.5mm and a lug of 46mm. There's a 60-minute dive scale, 200 meters of water resistance in an all-steel case that houses a 6L37 movement, which is a slimmed down 6L35 with 45 hours of power reserve and a rated accuracy of +10 to -15 seconds per day. You get a box sapphire crystal, black bezel with white numerals, box rectangular applied markers, stick indicators, a date window at 3 o'clock, and a sunray grey dial at the heart of it all. The price is just under $4,000 for a watch on a rubber strap, putting it in the ballpark of watches like the Tudor Black Bay 54, the Oris Diver 65, and similar skin divers from other Swiss brands. This watch price-wise, with the SJE nomenclature, is firmly in the reinterpretation category. Additionally, it sports the thin dive bezel in line with the SLA017 and the SLA043 and the original 62MAS. In terms of quality, it also sits in the premium end of the spectrum in terms of bezel action, quality of execution, and so on. Once you're done with watching all of this video, go to Google or directly to Reddit and Google Seiko movements. Google them all. Chances are you're going to get versions of the following statements coming up fairly often. Dog shit, inaccurate, hit and miss, Seiko lottery. Seiko movements are never COSC certified. That's a Swiss thing. Seiko movements also pretty much never state tolerances anywhere near COSC levels. +10 and -15 is a far cry from what you expect as a given in most Swiss watches from the $4,000 mark and up. To me, these movements are sort of like the AK-47s of the movement world. They're not super sexy, they're not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but they just work, and they don't cost $1,000 to service. The 8 series movements are downgraded versions of movements you find in grain Seiko and are slightly higher spec movements compared to the 6X movements. Like I said though, all of them just work. Having said that, yes, there is still a bit of a lottery to Seiko movements, and my own experience is that the 6R movements are truly lottery movements. They will pretty much behave within the stated tolerances, but they can be hyper precise or at the extreme end of the stated tolerance with wild variances depending on the watch position. The 6L movements are clearly a step up from the 6Rs, but it's unfair to say that a movement that states an accuracy in the ranges that Seiko does on this model for that price is not good enough by any standards. These Seikos vary in price from around $1,200 to around $4,000. A lot of people complain about that being too high. Some point to the movement accuracy as the key culprit. Others point more to the legacy of Seiko and their heritage of affordability and how these models are challenging our perception of what a Seiko should cost. Do I think they're expensive? Partially, but I don't think that they are by default unreasonably priced as such for what you get overall in terms of finishing, styling, heritage and storytelling. They are good watches. Could these watches be 25% cheaper? Yeah, absolutely. But a JLC should easily be 30% cheaper, so it's not like this is a Seiko only thing. I don't think they're totally insane in pricing at all. Ultimately though, this is for each of us to make up our own mind, but I don't think anybody is being totally ripped off. Now, why do people like skin divers? Because they look good, of course. Why do they look good? These watches like the Oris Diver 65, the BB54 and the Glasssuit CQ appeal to people for a couple of reasons. The most glaring reason is that these types of watches are typically smaller in length, height and circumference compared to the ubiquitous deep sea divers like the 300M, the Submariner and the Pelagos. The appeal can't be reduced to size alone though, although it does play a significant role. Skin diver cases like the SJE are typically sleeker with a more pronounced curvature along the length of the case. This curvature, coupled with a thinner mid-case, makes for a profile that sits low on the wrist even with an actual diameter of 40 millimeters or more. The curvature of the case, which is both downwards and inwards, draws the eye to the dial and bezel, naturally making them the centerpiece even without tons of details, applied markers and the lot on the dial. Then, more often than not, the bezel is typically thinner than a typical dive bezel, which again gives the watch a more refined and less in-your-face look compared again to the likes of the SKXW7 or the Sub or the 300M. These watches are elegant and refined, and to me, where the Subs of this world are the muscle cars of the dive watch world, these skin divers are the Alfa Romeos, the small Maseratis. If they were cars, they would be the ones you drive down to the Adriatic coast and into Portofino with, not along a broad stretch of highway on your way to Vegas. All of the models I've mentioned, they all look good and they all wear exceptionally well on the wrist. The largest of the bunch is the SLA065 with a diameter of 41.3 millimeters and a lug-to-lug of 47.6, which is totally acceptable for me and my wrist. The SPB143 lies in the middle. The SJE093 is the smallest of the bunch in terms of height and diameter, which makes it more true to the original than the SLA017, which I had for a while. Size-wise, it's also going to appeal to a lot of people. There are, single millimeters in height difference on these watches, but because of that very, very slim mid-case, you're dealing with a watch that regardless of the model sits low on the wrist. Individual preferences will vary, but we're in supremely good wearability territory for all of them as far as I'm concerned. Clearly, the slim bezel models feel smaller, but it's not by much, which comes down to that slimness and the slope on the bezels versus the flatness of the other bezels on the SPB models and the 065. The three I'm focusing on here, the SLA065, the SPB143 and the SJE093, are all stunners in their own right. They all share the same fundamental case styling. The hour markers, hands, they all share the same design language. The dials of the SPB143 and the SJE are both sunray grey, which I'm a big fan of, but the SLA065 is no slouch either with the deep blue bezel and dial plus the astrolabe etching on the dial face. Price and quality definitely follow each other. There's no doubt to me that you can tell which models are the SLA and the SJE models. There's no bracelet, and that's likely because bracelets are still among the weakest links of Seiko's production. The bracelet on the SPB models is fine, but I would feel ripped off if it was the same on the SLAs. The straps on the high-end models are excellent. You get steel hardware, and depending on the model, you also get steel keepers, making for a more premium feel. The tolerances in the high-end models are definitely better. You can also tell in SJEs in the King Seikos. They are just better made. In the case of dive watches, those bezels line up. There's no play in the bezel action, and in general, they just feel tighter and more precise. The movement winding feels more silky, and you can plainly see that the higher frequency of their high-end models lead to a smoother sweep of the seconds hand. To the extent that the high-end models, like the SLA065, have polished components, the polish is excellent, mind-blowing even. And yes, I would say that you can tell that it's better polished compared to a non-Zaratsu you find on a Tudor or an Oris or even an Omega. You are getting more for your money, for absolute sure. How do you choose which one's right for you? I've gone back and forth about this for a while, and it's not an easy decision because I really want to like the SJE093. It's improved so much over the SLA017 and the SLA043 from 2020. It's by far the clearest reinterpretation of the original 62MAS. It's also incredibly good looking in its own right, and yet I don't find it as compelling as an SPB143 or even an SLA065. At least for me, that is. Think of a Black Bay 54. Its ancestry is the 7922. The Submariner harkens back to the 6538 that Sean Connery wore in the Bond movies. The 50 Fathoms, the CQ, what do all of these watches have in common? Well, one, I would happily buy all of them if I could. And these are watches that have been redesigned in a way that the watchmaker can sell them as premium luxury offerings. Many years back, Volkswagen launched a new version of the Volkswagen Beetle. It was this luxury it-girl kind of car aimed at people with money and a sense of nostalgia. Same with the Mini Cooper. The new Mini Cooper is this luxury status symbol, and at least here where I live, for many years it was the gift wealthy dads gave to their teen daughters upon high school graduation. That and the Fiat 500. The thing though is that the original Beetle, the original Mini and the original Fiat were cars built to make motorism available to masses. They were quintessentially un-luxury. They took cars out of the rich space and made them accessible to normal people. Now, Seiko does the same with the SLA models and the SJE. This is the luxury, high-end, premium, upgrade status interpretation of the original 62MAS. It's absolutely stunning. It looks gorgeous, and Seiko's just doing what Rolex, Omega and Tudor and so many others are also doing. They're no different in that regard. No better, no worse. Seiko is banking on people paying for the premium model because it's the most visually faithful reinterpretation of the original 62MAS. But I think they made a mistake, at least with me. I prefer the SPB143. It's inferior. It has a definitively more dodgy movement, relatively speaking. The bezel isn't as smooth, and it has lateral play with the classic risk of, Seiko alignment issues. The bracelet is your standard, not great Seiko bracelet, and there are details on the dial that aren't super refined. And yet, this is, to me, the best one, and Seiko can't convince me otherwise. Why? Because it's not just about how something looks, it's about how something feels. The SJE is the luxury Volkswagen Beetle, the upscale status symbol. The SJE looks most like the original. The SPB, however, with all its faults, feels more like the original. The SPB is far more honest, more real, more authentic in terms of what it stands for. It's a solidly built watch with 200 meters of water resistance that will do exactly what you expect of it. For a pro specs, this is a true tool watch, and that's why I will not be buying the upscale SJE093. I'm sticking with the model that, to me at least, doesn't have any pretenses as to what it is. It's an excellent tribute to the 62MAS, but only visually. The 62MAS was also about being a tool, about being accessible and not being luxurious and specced out. It's not just about the look, it's about the feel. I want the honest watch, the real watch, the everyman's watch, the watch that I like to think is what the 62MAS was about. That's the SPB143, at least to me. What about you? What's your choice and why? Let me know in the comments. Like, subscribe. Cheers.